Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we're going to be discussing the organized labor movement of the late 19th century, or the late 1800s. So our learning targets will be these new business practices we've discussed in the late 1800s. How did these affect workers? We'll compare the goals and strategies of the labor unions, and we'll talk about the causes and effects of strikes in the late 1800s. So let's go ahead and get started. So what was it like working in the late 1800s? Well, there's low wages and long hours, and if you didn't like it, you could quit. But you wouldn't be able to get another job because there's a huge workforce of immigrants out there willing to take your old job, which means that your employers don't really have to treat you with much respect. A large, mostly immigrant workforce forces these wages way down into 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and they also had to work in sweatshop conditions, which are it's a factory, but it's small, dark, dirty, hot, not well ventilated. In other factories, they were poorly lit with light bulbs. They're overheated, and the poor equipment caused lots of accidents due to lack of training on the equipment, and people were just weren't qualified to use that heavy machinery. And if you were injured on the job, they didn't have any workman's comp, so you just kind of had to deal with it. They probably fired you and forced you out of the position and hired somebody with two good arms who was able to do it. So if you were hurt, you were out of luck. Children had to work too, and it's because of these low wages that, well, we need to send everybody to work. And accidents happen to these kids too, unfortunately, which makes it very dangerous. Women who went, most of them worked in factories, but some women did work as laundresses, typists, and telegraph operators. And then there was something called company towns, which is a place near the factory that was owned by the business and rented out to employees. You could get goods from the town store, but it was sold on credit with very high interest, so you would just be paying it back, and you'd always be running a tab, and they called this wage slavery. So people want to sort of change what's happening to workers in the late 1800s, and some of them turn to socialism. A lot of European workers turn to socialism / communism. Socialism would be public control of property and income, or the government owns the property and income. This movement spreads across Europe, and under this system, wealth should be distributed equally to everyone so that society at large, they should do it because it would make everybody equal. This idea is adopted from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto, which denounces the capitalist system and says that workers will eventually rise up and overthrow it. Most Americans, this is going kind of against their ideals of liberty and free enterprise and capitalism, so they oppose socialism, but labor activists, they borrow ideas from socialism for their reforms. One strategy that the unions used to negotiate was called collective bargaining. And collective bargaining is negotiating as a group for better working conditions. If one person walks in and demands a raise, they can easily say no. If 1,000 people walk in and ask for a raise, or else they're going to go on strike, it's a little harder to deal with. They may have to take that a little more seriously. So a strike is a form of collective bargaining, and workers cease working until their demands are met. And this can be a local strike, state strike, regional strike, or a national strike. A couple of the first labor unions that you need to know about. The Knights of Labor are led by Terence Powderly, and it grows to 700,000 people nationwide, and their main focus as a union is on social gains for both its skilled workers and unskilled workers. And then you've got the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL, which is began by Samuel Gompers, and they only allow skilled workers in. So workers that have a skill, that know what they're doing, and they focus on workers' issues like wages, hours, and conditions worked in. Here is a little chart about the major strikes of the late 1800s. We've got the railroad strikes, the Haymarket Square strike, the Homestead strike, and the Pullman strike. If you want to screenshot that or just copy it into your notes, it's a good cause and effect of the strikes. Haymarket Strike, radicals and anarchists during a strike kill police and strikers, but even though these people weren't necessarily associated with the Knights of Labor Union, it still ends the Knights of Labor Union, and employers start to associate unions with violence because of this Haymarket Square strike. The Homestead Strike, a owner brings in the Pinkerton Detective Agency to break up the strike. An anarchist during this tried to assassinate Frick, and public opinion turns against unions. And Eugene V. Debs, during this time, led the American Rail Workers Union, another union. During the Pullman strike, Pullman is a type of train car, a company, they cut wages to 25% of what they were. 300,000 workers walk off the job in response. President Grover Cleveland during this time sends in federal troops to break up the strike, saying that this union was disrupting free trade. So under the Sherman Antitrust Act, he would be able to send in federal troops and break up this strike. So what is the entire impact of labor unions? Well, employers start to go to court and use the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up strikes after the Pullman strike. And with the courts usually protecting employers' property rights, they usually win. And unions are not even recognized as legal organizations, and the gains that they make during this time are limited. And so governments, unions, and employers are going to battle over labor issues for years to come. That's all I have for you today. And if you have anything else you want to ask, make sure to write it down and bring it back to class. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.